This goes without saying, but we are absolutely thrilled to have you in today. We've been doing a number of these virtual Q&A and fireside chat sessions, and I think Richie may have said it best recently, but even after a year of doing these virtually, Zoom is still a bit weird. So we'll try and keep it casual. We'll do 40 minutes of Q&A and hop in whenever, and then we can open it up to the larger audience. So I guess for everyone in the Zoom, just like put your questions that you have during the chat and we can kind of field those towards the end.
Sounds great.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so by means of formal introduction, we'll get the formal stuff out of the way. Dylan is the CEO and co-founder of Figma, which is a design and prototyping platform for teams who build products together. With the support of the Thiel Fellowship, Dylan dropped out of Brown University to start Figma with his TA Evan Wallace, who ultimately went on to become Figma's CTO. And they built Figma on the web in hopes of tearing down the walls around the siloed design process. Dylan himself champions open, accessible design and believes such tooling must evolve for a cloud-based and collaborative world. So welcome, Dylan.
Thank you. It's great to be here because I'm a huge fan of everything y'all are doing. And it's just amazing to see all the companies coming out of SBC. So it's just really exciting to get to meet you all.
Yeah, it sounds like you're pretty intermingled with the community too, which is great. You're familiar with the mission and kind of who's coming out of it, which is awesome. So yeah,
I think to be with so many successful, amazing companies starting to come out of the doors. So the virtual doors now, I guess. But really, it's incredible, and it's just great to be with you all today.
Awesome. Yeah, I think aside from many of us at SPC being part of the larger Figma community, whether designers, engineers, creators of sorts, I personally find your founder journey to be one that is both unique and inspiring in a lot of ways. And I think, as you know, many of us here are at some of the earliest stages of company building, whether it be the exploration phase, ideation, or getting a product to market. And I think that journey, as we know, can be one that is both long and sometimes lonely at times. And I think, right, in today's connected world, a lot of founders see what we attribute to be as overnight success for a lot of companies. And I think what is unique to your story is that this wasn't really the case with Figma, and that it took you years to create and ideate and really get a product to market and hit stride. And I find that inspiring and something that I'm really looking forward to learning from. So
yeah, it's interesting because I really don't know of like any overnight successes, really, even though this is the myth. This is like what the press loves to glom onto and loves to talk about. It's like every overnight success you might point to, I'm just like, yeah, and there were like years of work behind that.
Yeah.
And for Figma, that was certainly the case. I mean, we started the company in August 2012. We started talking with the company in December 2011, and we raised our seed round in June 2013. We launched our closed beta in December of 2015. We launched our GA release in October of 2016. Mm-hmm. We didn't start charging until summer of 2017. So it's like, 5 years in before we made our first dollar.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go back to Figma's inception. Sure. You said 2011, 2012. You're 19 years old at the time, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. 19, 20 years old, you're studying computer science at Brown, and you start working on a few experiments, WebGL experiments with your TA Evan at the time. And unlike probably, 99.9% of your classmates, you decide that simply experimenting isn't enough, right? And you decide to take an idea and apply to the Thiel Fellowship. So take us back to that moment in time where, at such a young age, you had to have some level of conviction that you wanted to create something of impact in the world, right? Enough to have you to apply to the Thiel Fellowship and ultimately drop out of Brown. So really, where did that motivation come from, and what was that contrarian belief that fueled you to start Figma?
I mean, first of all, I'll just mention that Evan is brilliant technically, and a lot of the early WebGL experimentation was really him, and so I don't want to take credit for it because he's incredible, and he was really pushing the bounds of that, and I was following him there. And I think anyone who knows Evan will understand what I mean there. He's just one of the best technical minds of our time. And you know, a lot of people that have like met him and like John Carmack, for example, put him in the same league as John Carmack, which is quite a compliment if you study that history. The At the time, I mean, I had worked at O'Reilly Media in high school, and that was really influential to me because as part of O'Reilly, I got to see a lot of the startup community, even though it's in Sebastopol. If you don't know O'Reilly, the company that makes the books with like the animals on them, and they also do a bunch of conferences in the tech. And I was kind of like in a marketing department, but I was also getting to code a little bit, and I could just go to the warehouse anytime and get a book and read up on it, which was pretty sweet. And they had this defective book rack that they weren't really defective. There was like a page torn or something. It was not bad, and it was awesome. But from that, I got to meet the startup community, and I was very excited about entrepreneurship. But I was also excited about a lot of other things like research and you know just whatever. I was just curious, and I worked at LinkedIn the summer of my freshman year. I worked at Flipboard the summer of my sophomore year as an intern, and both those experiences was like, wow, this startup thing is pretty cool. I actually didn't really have much context to like what a big company was because I thought LinkedIn was the bigger company between LinkedIn and Flipboard, and LinkedIn was like 400 people or something at the time. So I was like, oh, that's a big company. Like I think I like startups more. And uh, and I was just really excited about this idea of doing projects, getting them out there, and being able to get build an audience and do that at scale, and what the internet could provide with that and make that possible. At Flipboard, I got really excited about design tools and creative tools, and I started. I'd always been excited about design, but that was something that made me go and look deeper into that area. And Evan and I were starting to talk about when we started a company. I think we gave it like a 1% probability at the time. I mean, it was definitely not like a for sure thing. And basically, I applied for the Thiel Fellowship, just wanting to figure out, okay, well, if we did start a company, we probably need some money to do it. And it was sort of like a off chance. And I'd also been convinced by this guy named Dale Stevens to apply as well. And through the interview process of the Thiel Fellowship, which at the time was quite lengthy, now it's very fast. That I think made us even more convinced that we wanted to start a company together because we kept iterating on ideas. And we sort of realized that WebGL was going to be the future of all creative tools. And that was something that it took some conviction to build. But once we built that conviction, then I think we were like, okay, which tools are going to be? And that was sort of the next part of the journey was figuring out what do we build here.
Right.
At first, it was just like we knew we want to start a company. We weren't sure exactly what it's going to be. We really started with the why now of WebGL.
Right. And for those in the audience that may not know much about WebGL, can you explain what exactly WebGL is?
Yeah, WebGL is just a way to use the GPU in your computer in the browser. And so it lets you do more complex graphics work in the browser. And so it backs a lot of the parts of Figma that are more graphically intensive and makes it so it can be really performant. There were actually, there were a bunch of companies, one in particular called Aviary before Figma that tried to do what we did. And Aviary was an example of a company that just quite literally tried to take the Adobe suite and put it online. And it was not performant enough. And because of that, and they did it all in Flash, it just wasn't the right tech. And so they were like, not that long before Figma. And so everyone thought this thing was like not possible to do.
Right.
And one of the first things we did when we started Figma was we called Aviary up and said, hey, like, we're thinking about doing this thing that you recently pivoted from. Can you just tell us like why you pivoted? And they're just like, oh my God, don't do that. It's a terrible idea. Like, here are all the reasons it's wrong. And we kind of listened to them and said, okay, well, we think that we have a reason why it might be right. But it was a little scary at the time.
Yeah, it's so funny because at the time you were building into a market with a very much larger Adobe and successful Adobe, and I think many founders would have run away from that, right? And I think many founders also struggle with fitting into an existing market at first versus building towards their ultimate vision, which it sounds like you had a very, very clear vision from the get-go. But I'm curious.
That's generous. We knew we wanted to build creative tools, but we didn't know which tool. And so we went from at some point we looked at 3D, we looked at computational photography, photo editing, eventually got to interface design, but it took a while to get to interface design, even though it was something that was like always on the list and under consideration. It was not something that we started off right away.
Right. When you started, after you applied to the Thiel Fellowship and ultimately were accepted and dropped out of Brown and started work on Figma, and you looked ahead and saw the very much larger Adobe in front of you. And
Yep.
kind of take us back to your thinking there about how you thought about competition in early days, and how you ultimately convinced your first users to maybe hop off of Adobe and join Figma.
Well, so it was actually interesting because Adobe had this product that they acquired through Macromedia called Fireworks. And Fireworks is, a really amazing product, way ahead of its time. And it was actually sunsetted by Adobe right around the time that we raised our seed round.
Oh,
and
wow.
we saw this being sunsetted and we went, wow, we're trying to figure out what to do. We're kind of thinking about like Photoshop in the browser maybe, but there's a lot of use cases that Photoshop covers. We're trying to figure out which one are we going to go after. And Fireworks scaled. And we're like, well, that's an opportunity. And so we started like kind of running towards that. And meanwhile, we were doing that though, and we weren't out of stealth yet. We were doing it. We thought, okay, we have to like really be right because we're putting this in front of people. They don't like it enough. So we have to keep building until it's good enough. And we don't want to ruin our brand, our rep by putting out a product that's buggy. Meanwhile, Sketch was already in market and they were just building and gaining some early word of mouth traction. And they started really taking the market from Fireworks essentially, because people that were in that Fireworks community looking for a new home. And meanwhile, the entire market was growing. So interface design was becoming a thing. It always had been a thing, but it was, I think more people were doing it. So in the ratios, for example, like IBM back in 2012 when we started Figma was at, this is stuff we knew now in hindsight, but at the time we didn't have this data. IBM was at, for example, 1 designer to every 72 engineers across the company. And then,
Wow.
5 years later, 2017, they were at 1 designer to every 8 engineers across the company. On mobile, they're 1 to 3. And so
what's it at now? Do you know?
I don't know now. I want to know. But yeah, so I think most companies are going for sort of like a 1 to 6 to 1 to 8 ratio at this point. Some companies are more aggressive though, and some are like 1 to 3 even. And more importantly, now it's, I think everyone wants to be part of the design process because design is how you win or lose. I think everyone that's on this call intuitively knows this, right? Like this is just part of being a software founder in 2021 is of course it has to be well designed. Otherwise, like how are you going to compete? Well, there was a time, of course, when, you could put a product out and it didn't have to be great design. And, just the mere fact that it existed and was like performant, that was enough. And we're no longer in that age. And that's why I think we saw this explosive growth in the market. But anyway, Sketch, I think, was getting some word of mouth traction. The market was growing. Meanwhile, we're just racing, going, oh God, we got to get out there. We kept putting it in front of people and they were like, yeah, it's not ready yet. And so we were testing it. But I think one thing we did that really helped us was we actually made a map of sort of the Twitter sphere, which is where a lot of designers hang out, and is online. And I sort of seeded it with people that I just knew and respected. And I crawled Twitter and looked at all these accounts and who they're following, and sort of did PageRank over it all and put it in Gephi, which is a network visualization tool. And from there, I could see sort of the nodes in the network. And then of those people, I kind of looked at their portfolios, looked at their Twitters, looked at what they're talking about. And I was like, okay, which ones are like, am I really inspired by it? I want to get to know because they've worked on my favorite products, or I just like think they're interesting. And I would cold email them. And most of the time they're like, yeah, I'm down to hang out and get a coffee. Yeah. Especially if you're buying, I'll give you feedback on your tool or whatever. And so I would meet up with them and ask for their feedback, and they would, they're good designers. So they would give me really good feedback, and then invite them to the alpha, and they would give me sometimes some more feedback, and we'd have a back and forth and correspondence. And over time, they really helped us hone the product. And also they were early evangelists for us when we launched because we'd taken them along for the journey. And a lot of them are still friends and Figma customers and evangelists today.
That's incredible. I think that it goes to one of the questions we'll get to a little bit later about creating a community. And it's something that Figma has done from day one, right? And I think early on when you had those initial users and you were kind of ideating and iterating on the alpha with them, you fast forward a little bit to maybe when you were going for your seed round, and you had some level of conviction that you were ready to raise, and you met a man by the name of John Lilly, and he's an entrepreneur turned investor, and I'll let you give the intro on him, but you speak about John having a significant influence on Figma over the years. And one of your first meetings with him, though, he said to you, something along the lines of, you guys are great. I just don't think you know what you're doing yet.
Yes.
Come back later or something like that,
Yeah.
right? And you kept in touch with him over the years, and ultimately he invested in one of
Yeah.
your rounds. But I think one of the things that I've heard you talk about is that you attribute that conversation a lot to not having a clear enough vision of what the product was early on or what problems it would solve early on. So I'm really curious on how you really honed in on that in the early days. Did you leverage the community of alpha users?
Yep.
Kind of how did you get to a place where you could fundraise, where your pitch was clear enough?
There's a really interesting framework in this book, Pollution Strategy, and it's called Eliminate, Raise, Reduce, Create. And this is actually pretty useful for us because we were kind of building for a while, and we had a lot of things we wanted to do, which I think is like where a lot of people are at when they're in the very early stages. It's like, well, what do you want this to be? And they're like 30 minutes later, the pitch has been completed, and you're like, wow, did you breathe during that? And, just because there's so much you want to do, you got so much ambition, and there's so much you can see the technology that you're building solving the world. And that was certainly the way it was for the first, year of product development for us or so. And at some point, I just took the team, and we were maybe 6 or 7 people then. It was pretty small, and put up a whiteboard and did this grid. And I think Drew Houston was the person that had introduced me to this book, for what it's worth. So just to give him credit. So it's like on the top left quadrant is eliminate, and then on top right is reduce, bottom left is raise, and then bottom right is create. And basically saying, okay, compared to the competition, which you have to understand, like, what's the competition? What are you going to do that your competitors, what are you not going to do that your competitors do? For us, that was, for example, that was print workflows. We weren't going to do anything print related, and a lot of other things too, but that was one of the big ones. The next one is reduce. What are you going to do worse than your competitors? There's a huge long list of things for us that. Next one is raise. What are the few things you're going to do that are better than your competition? And create. Like, what are you going to do that's like brand new? Which for us was things like multiplayer or vector networks. And I think by being really brutal about that, and then plus saying, here are all the use cases we've talked about in the last year, let's cross off everything but 1 or 2, and then hone in on sort of this rubric.
Right.
That was helpful in sort of focusing me, but also focusing the team on like what's our point of view on what the product could be. And from there, it was a question of like, what's the strategy to get market share? And our initial strategy was wrong. And John was kind of reacting to that, to your point. Our initial strategy was something along the lines of like, we're going to build this community first. People are going to come together. It'll kind of be like a Dribble, but like it'll be better than Dribble because you can like see the designs, you can riff on each other, and you can remix them. And then like, question mark. But then step 3 would be like SaaS tool, and we'd make some money from that. And at some point, we're like, wait a second, maybe we should make the money first and build a community second. And it took us a while to get there, but it was a very important call, I think. And then that was, once we got to that point, we realized they're both important. Just like, let's start with the tool and build the offering for businesses. And then it started to come more together. And for what it's worth, it took us another 5-6 years to get to the point where we built that community. And we're still building it. We're in the very early stages right now, but it's something that we really care about.
Yeah, Figma is notorious for staying in stealth for years. And I think you outlined this at the very beginning of the conversation, but you raised both your seed and Series A from stealth, right? And really, you didn't have a public-facing product at the time, and you had very few user metrics to present to potential investors. And
we had no metrics,
no metrics, so zero metrics, and not a public-facing product yet. And I think a lot of founders early on struggle with being market or distribution scale focused versus being impact or mission driven. And I think a lot of times we hear, distribution at all costs, right? Which was not the case with Figma. You stayed narrow in terms of team, product, and customers. So I'm really curious on how you think about this paradigm of market versus scale, and if it's changed over the years of building Figma.
Yeah, I think like, first of all, there's different eras of Silicon Valley. Like, one is, for a long time, lean startup was like the gospel. And it was all about, you have to put it in front of people as soon as possible. You have to ship, so you can iterate, you can get feedback. I think the internet's so big that if you make something, you'll be able to find some people to use it. The question is like, are they the right people? and will they give you the right feedback? If you get the feedback that you already know, like it's not really a useful exercise to ship. And so I think it's important to launch when you're probably a little bit earlier than you want to, because most of us on this call are probably perfectionists, I suspect. And so if you take the advice of like launch when you're ready, it's like, that's probably really bad advice. But at the same time, I think you don't want to be in a world where if you launch, people can't see the vision of what you're trying to do. And if it just completely falls flat and people are like, that's not interesting, like that's just so far away from what, actually I need, then it's not going to be a useful launch for you. And so unless it's a pure marketing launch, which is fine, you can decouple marketing and product, then you're going to have to follow up pretty quickly with product launch, because from there, people forget who you are very quickly, it turns out. Unless they like see it every day, and they're not going to see it every day, they're going to see it once, then you maybe have a month or two to let them in. And so for Figma, I wish we got into market a little bit earlier. And I think that the way we could have done that is by hiring faster. Despite it raising all this money, one thing that we didn't do is we didn't hire quickly enough. I think we were not at a point where we built the culture quite right. And I think that's part of why we're waiting. And it took a while before the culture was set and it felt really good. And that's when we started hiring more. But if you take away one thing from this call, it's like, don't do what we did, ship faster if you can, but also like make sure that you have something in your initial launch that's going to be exciting for your customers or the people that are going to use your product. That's something they can grasp onto at the vision, and also hire fast if you can, because that's going to make all the difference.
Right. And you spoke to this a little bit at the beginning of the conversation, but you have noted that the 3 pillars to Figma success really being the ability to create, the ability to share, and the ability to create community. And you said at the beginning, you focused primarily on community, which was wrong. But I'm curious on how these 3 pillars came about and really how they've helped contribute to Figma success over the course of the past 10 years.
Yeah, I think of it as more concentric circles, almost like creation's in the center, and then collaboration around that, and then communities around that. And it's kind of the reason I think of that is because you really can't, the reason everyone's there is for the creation in the first place. But then once they're there for creation, then they'll collaborate. And then once people are there for that, then they'll form a community. But yeah, I mean, I think that for us, creation and collaboration were sort of 2 concentric circles we had to have initial offering in order to really have a differentiator versus the competition, which was Sketch at the time. Plus, all these other tools that were in the Sketch ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because Figma has always taken a technical first approach to design tooling, right? But as a designer, I've never heard someone in a Figma sales conversation talk about the GPU processing of what Figma does, right? I have always heard them talk about, heard them talk about, we streamline the design process, we help with cross-team collaboration and scale design systems, et cetera. And I think that's apparent in those 3 pillars or circles that you've spoken to. But I'm curious on the technical side of things, now that you've nailed in-browser collaboration, what are some of the biggest technical challenges ahead for the team?
Yeah, well, I don't know if we've nailed in-browser collaboration, first of all. Like, we have quite a roadmap there. So I hope that, in 2 years from now, you look back and go, oh, wow, like, it really was shit. Because I think we can make the experience much better still. And so hopefully lots more to come there. I think that on the technical side, there's a lot of challenges. I think especially like building scale a real-time system that is sort of not only real-time in terms of the multiplayer editing, but real-time across all of Figma. And then doing that in a way that's, there's a bunch of interesting stuff about the file format and sort of like, how do you make sure that the file format is working across all these different clients. There's a bunch of distributed systems problems that are really interesting. And obviously the graphics work is also extremely interesting as well.
Right.
But a lot of it is sort of like just kind of fun systems problems in terms of, memory management and performance. And yeah, I mean, it's been really cool to see just how complex some of these problems can get over time. And I think one of the things that we honestly, one of the reasons we chose this problem for Figma in the first place, because again, we're kind of starting with the why now, and then from there got to the point of like, what's the problem we're solving? Some of the constraints we had when we were selecting that problem was we wanted to find something which we felt would be challenging both from a design standpoint and also a technical standpoint. Because we thought, if we can get those things, first of all, we'll feel very engaged for a very long time, which is definitely true. It's still very challenging. And also we'll attract the best people to work with us. And that's like, why would you want to work with anyone but the best people? And
Definitely.
so yeah, I think it's really wonderful to work on a really hard problem, because that way, not only do you have a moat, which is great from a business standpoint, but also day to day, you get to work with the best folks.
Yeah, and consistently challenging as well, which is
Right.
great. If we look forward a bit, and let's say, this remote world that we've all entered almost a year to date at this point, Figma kind of had a really interesting abstract moment at the beginning of this remote world last year, where teams were using the product in ways that I don't think Figma was ever built to be used for. For example, there was a map being passed around Twitter, the stay-at-home Silicon Valley, where teams were adding their physical office locations to this collaborative map. And then last year around the holidays, we saw teams hosting gift exchanges in Figma, where they were kind of they were putting gifts on artboards and having this kind of spontaneous virtual gift exchange in Figma, which is wild. And so I'm curious, even in the past 2 weeks with the movement in the NFT movement we've seen, and kind of the creator economy and digital assets, like, how do you look at Figma the next 5 years? Do you feel like it could ever become more than just a product design tool?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that so many thoughts. Those are some great examples, so thank you. First of all, I think that just one lesson I learned in the last year is that people are looking for spaces, and Figma's a space. And so that's why you see stuff like Stay-at-Home Valley, but also just like, there's all sorts of different ways that people have interacted with Figma. I mean, one of the things I saw at the start of the pandemic, and we've continued to see, is people playing games in Figma. Like traditional board games, they'll recreate them. There's plugins they've made to like shuffle cards and flip cards over. I mean, I think it's pretty crazy, pretty fast. And and sort of all sorts of other things. Also we've seen illustration, we've seen people playing their gardens or their shelving units. Like people kind of make anything with Figma at this point. And even things like photorealistic 3D objects, which maybe you wouldn't want to. And then Douglas just mentioned that Doom in Figma is fun too, and I agree. There's a plugin that you can play Doom in Figma with if you're trying to just like take a break from work, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think that as we look ahead for the next 5 years, our mission is to make design accessible to everyone, and the vision rather is to make design accessible to all. And the mission is to really help teams collaborate visually. And so I think a lot of the stuff that you're talking about there is the vision. The vision of making design accessible to everyone, we take a pretty broad view of what design is. I think of it as not just like interface design, which is really our bread and butter today, but really just how do you make it so that anyone can visually communicate, but also how do you make it so that people can build software? How do you make it so people can be creative at all? Right. And you can reduce the barriers to being creative in the first place. And if you kind of think about like, what is the process of being creative for software right now? We're in the middle of that with design, but I think there's a lot more we can do on the sort of like ideation side before you even get to the design process, and also a lot more on the sort of like, how do you build it side? And if you zoom out from there, just like, the entire creative field is so wide open still. And we feel like there's a big opportunity to do that and to venture into that field and to really help our customers there. So yeah, lots more to come.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it sounds like the GPU of the WebGL is being put to the test too with this cross team and, teams from everywhere coming together to collaborate in Figma, which is amazing. I know, so before we open up to the audience, I want to leave you with one South Park Commons specific question here. And that kind of our mantra, if you want to call it, is that it's written in our physical space down in South Park. I don't know if you've been there yet, but it's that you only get You have not been yet?
I have not been to the physical space. I love to go after COVID.
Hopefully soon, right?
Yes, fingers crossed.
Yes, but you only get a few shots at building your life's work, the kind of work that matters, that makes a difference, that can't happen without you. You don't come to South Park Commons to play it safe. We're here to dive off the deep end together. So let's look forward to 10, 20 years from now. post Figma, you joined South Park Commons. And what is Dylan's next life's work?
I hope so, Figma. I don't see why in 10 to 20 years I'm not doing Figma.
Let's say 40 years from now.
Yeah, 40 years I'll be like, almost be 70 years old. So maybe I'm slowing down at that point. But I don't know. Maybe another way to phrase the question is like, if Figma blew up tomorrow and if a law was passed, an international law, not even just the United States one, whereas like Dylan Field can no longer work on Figma or anything in the creative tool space.
That's a good way to put it.
I think I'd have to, first of all, I grieve a little bit, but then I think I would probably like just go back to school with my guess. And there's just so much to learn. I mean, I loved my time in college, and despite dropping out, I dropped out because I thought I could learn more by dropping out than being in college. It's not a comment on Brown; it's a comment on how fucking brilliant Evan is. Mm-hmm. I think if there's just so much more that I would like to know and learn, and if if there's just so many opportunities everywhere in the world right now, and right. Whether it's about medicine or energy or just the human condition and like what it means to be human, there's so many different ways technology can impact all that, and so I'd probably like look a little bit outside of software at first, but software is also infinitely interesting, and maybe the definition of what software changes as the notions of what is human changes. I'd be very excited to like work on software in a brain-computer interface world, for example. But God damn it, now I'm back to creative tools again. So,
full circle.
Full circle.
Awesome, Dylan.
The international law has been passed, so what do I do?
This has been amazing. I think that Figma is truly the story of a labor of love turned into $1 billion business, and we're all excited to both be a part of and contribute to Figma's continued success. And I hope there's more labors of love that come about in the coming years, and hopefully some are even started by South Park Commons members. So with that, thank you. And I think we could open up to the audience and let them ask some questions as well.
Sounds great.
All right. So someone asked, from a leadership perspective, there's a big debate on building an engineering-led company where the engineers have power versus a product-led company where the PMs have power. In Figma's case, as a design tool, do the product designers lead decision-making, and how does Figma structure their teams internally?
Good question. I don't know. I have a weird twisted answer on this one, which is that I think it should be, I have a point of view of like, it's best when things are product led and in that you're building for people. I think engineering is a means to an end to like help people and make their lives better in some way. And that said, I think like there's no reason why you have to have product managers do product leadership. You can have engineers do product leadership too. We did at Figma. Like we didn't have product managers for a long time. We'd have engineers or designers be product managers. And at some point, I think we realized that there's more to just like the job of product management than just talking to people and like hearing their needs and like flaying them back to the team and coordinating work. Like there's also a lot of work around making sure that like there's buy-in and that people are communicating, and it actually can be really useful to have people that are like specialized in that. And then also it's really helpful as you scale to have product process. So that's why we have product managers in the job now, and we have a product team that's we've really invested in. But I think of it as like everyone at Figma is a product leader, and everyone's contributing to the product vision. At the same time, like you have to find the right balance between building the product and pushing on the bounds of things and building things the right way. Because if you don't build things the right way, like you're gonna die. It's a question of how long, right? At some point, someone will come along, they'll outcompete you, and you won't be able to keep up because your infrastructure is terrible, or your site will be going down all the time. And it's really important to always be going back, figuring out what tech debt you're addressing, and to fix it, but at the right cadence. I think at the extreme end of that is also wrong. If show me a code base like no tech debt, and I'll show you a dead code base, right? Anyone that's like worked infinitely on making sure that they have the perfect architecture we'll know that like that's probably a company that didn't work out. And so I think you kind of have to balance these things, but I think of it as like, you build things for people.
Right. All right, Jeremy, taking you off mute.
Oh, thanks. Hey, Dylan. First of all, thanks for building Figma. I use it all the time and I love it. It's so interesting to hear you talk about sort of the vision for what is design going forward and all the collaboration stuff that you're sort of raising the bar on. But at the end of the day, I am an interface designer and I spend pretty much all day drawing rectangles in Figma and putting them in auto layout combinations, not really collaborating, every sort of minute. And I often find myself just like very frustrated. I'm like spending all day just clicking through shit and like trying to visualize on a canvas what I have in my head.
Yeah.
This is not a problem specific to Figma, but like I've been thinking a lot about what is the future of like just designing these experiences. I want to like use my hands. I want things to be able to be represented as quickly as I can think about them.
Exactly.
And it frustrates me that I can't. So I'm just, what are your thoughts on where this is all going?
Yeah, I agree. I'm also frustrated with that. By the way, first of all, thank you for the support too, and for using Figma. And if you do have feedback on how we can make it so that you can do that in less clicks, but still be intuitive to new people coming in, let me know. But to get back to the sort of the original question, I think that in a perfect world, just to like set the vision somewhere, you've eliminated the gap between imagination and reality, and you've got some non-invasive device on your head that makes it so you can think a thought and it shows on the screen. And so it's like, okay, what's the next step from there? Well, if you can't get to that world, then maybe you're getting to a world where you have different types of input that maybe is outside of like the brain and those kind of channels, and you're still somehow getting results on the screen. Perhaps AI is part of that, perhaps it's not. But I think that you still want to human the loop and you want it to be directed. One of the things that we're excited about is, to your point about the components, is design systems as a way to make it so that you're at least building with Lego pieces instead of having to like create your Legos. And that's why we've invested so much in design systems, but it's still, there's so much to do there. And also why we've invested in community too, because if you can have the community have content that's that basically is out there under a license that's makes it so that other people can use it. If you treat it back, then you can also be pig building with other people's Lego pieces. And so hopefully that gets you to your idea faster. But yeah, it's this is like sort of the eternal problem of creative tools, is like, how do I get the thing from my brain into the computer screen? Why is that loop not fast enough? And I think to create tools that work at the speed of thought is hard, and it's also like gonna be a problem forever, and that's why it's a really fun problem to work on.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mika. Then I don't know if I can take people off mute either. I don't know if you can make me a.
Yeah, I'm off mute though.
Hello.
Hi, Dylan and Mika. Had a question about convictions. You mentioned when thinking about WebGL, it took a while for you to get to that place of conviction and thesis for Figma. Could you walk me through your personal path to get to that conviction for WebGL and thesis behind Figma in general?
Yeah, so we had conviction in WebGL, actually. That was the thing we had conviction, was WebGL as a technology to use. And the question was like, what do we use it for? And so what we did was we first, we were looking at a bunch of different spaces. We looked at kind of combinational photography. What's this process of like remixing photos and recombining things? For example, like I have a picture of your face and my face, and like I can swap them, and you're like, oh God, this result is horrible. That'd be like one thing we built early on, for example, or like a way to change the colors or remove the backgrounds of a photo, stuff like that. At some point we're like, wow, this is very consumer oriented. Maybe you should just like make a meme generator. It's 2012, fall of 2012, and memes, those are clearly going to be a big deal. People are really getting excited about them, and all the meme generation is really bad. Then we worked on that for like a total of a week. And then at the end of the week, I was going, wow, I don't know why I'm doing this. I didn't drop out of Brown to make memes. This is a horrible idea. This has no meaning. And I think Evan was ready to leave as well. And so we're like, okay, not that. And then we started working at sort of like a Lightroom in the browser, a photo editing tool. And then we kind of realized that that was not the right timing for that. And that the reason that photo editing was exciting at that point was because smartphones were taking off. And if you look at smartphones over time, megapixels over time, we're kind of in this concave up shape where, megapixels were really growing to the point where that could be your professional camera. It was not quite there, but it was like basically getting there. And then if you look at camera sales, they're kind of like also sort of concave down, or appeared to maybe go in that direction where they were leveling off and we weren't sure what was going to happen next in that graph. And it was like, okay, wait a second. So basically all photography is moving to phones and we're building a photo editor in the browser. That doesn't make sense. And then like, well, maybe there's a way to like sync photos from your phone to the cloud and edit in the cloud. Still very focused on the things we're doing well. And we thought, well, no, there's like Google Photos, there's Dropbox Photos. There's also like, at the time, there's a company called Everpix that we thought was really interesting. And we thought this is not the right thing either. And then kind of went from photo editing to Photoshop and, looked at all the use cases for Photoshop, and there's a ton. And interface design was one that we saw as like a really big opportunity, like I mentioned earlier with the fireworks story. And so that was sort of the path, but also the reality was like we had a lot of these things that we wanted to do, and these are all sort of on a list. And so it wasn't like interface design was never on the list. It was always on the list, just like 3 or 4 down. It was, there's a lot of things we thought we could work on that would be really fun. But we eventually realized interface design was like a huge problem that people needed to be solved. And also the collaboration aspects of that would be really important. So we saw the entry point, saw the problem, we saw the audience growing, and we started racing towards it because it was also really fun.
All right, Anthony.
Thank you. So yeah, I was thanks for this, Dylan. This has been really fascinating. I was really interested that you figured out how to raise seed and Series A still in stealth without like flashy numbers and a bajillion users and money coming in or whatever the things are that I've at least in reading blogs been told this is the kind of stuff you need to do to raise even seed, but definitely Series A. So I'm curious, what is your secret? How did you even reason about, going for those rounds, or, how did you, you don't have to share your pitch deck, but like, how'd you approach that problem?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Anthony. Nice to meet you. Well, first of all, I think because everyone here is working in companies, and so I'll just point out that there are no rules to fundraising. And so you'll read all sorts of best practices, and don't get me wrong, there's like plenty of best practices, but there's no rules. And so, there are stories of people negotiating like literally every term that you could ever see in a term sheet. Some of those companies went, blew up in the worst ways possible for what it's worth. It turns out there's like maybe an anti-correlation between people that negotiate that hard and people that are also good at leadership and management, maybe. But the reality is like you can negotiate for anything. There are no rules, and I think that some tips though are that getting an intro to a venture capitalist or to an angel investor through someone they trust ends up being really important. I think that raising it in parallel is really important. That was something we did well in our seed for both those cases. It was kind of by accident. I had interned at LinkedIn. Jeff at LinkedIn was really wonderful to me, and was impressed for some reason with me as an intern. I had really been building on the shoulders of giants there, and like both work that had been done by the team historically, but also my mentor Pete Skomrock, who was amazing to work with, and so it's not anything that I could like. Oh, Mika goes, LinkedIn alumni, woot, yes, LinkedIn's awesome. But Jeff had approached me at sort of the end of the summer and said, hey, like, if you ever start a company, let me know. And so, maybe like 6-7 months into Figma, I sent him an email and said, hey, I'd love to catch up and show what we're working on. And we had a bunch of tech we could demo at that point. And so that helped us do the seed. And I showed it to him, he was interested in investing. And then he also made a bunch of introductions to venture capitalists. And, it's a pretty strong foundation coming from Jeff, about as strong as you could possibly get. And I think the email said something like, I'm investing whether or not you do, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. But I also hadn't planned to start a raise, but inadvertently started a raise that way. And all of a sudden I found myself in a process, and a parallel process of that, which is what you want. Since then I kept going, and, we closed a month later. That was not planned, but ended up working really well. For the A round, honestly, it was more relationship driven. I had met John Lilly, as mentioned earlier, in our seed round. He's no longer a VC, otherwise, but you should all work with him if you have the chance. He's incredible. The seed round had been led by Danny Reimer at Index, who's also incredible, but different ways. And John was someone I talked to in the seed, and someone we were also really interested in working with. But he told me, it's not the right time, and I'm actually happy to keep in touch. How can we be helpful? And it's funny because now, like, how it can be helpful, that's like a meme that people joke about it as like, oh, well, no one actually means it. But actually, sometimes they do. Not all the time, but sometimes. And in John's case, he really did. And so we would actually meet up every month and a half and talk. And over time, we built a relationship. He actually had helped me with strategy, give me a lot of feedback. I had changed our strategy for the company. And at some point, he said, hey, if you ever decide to raise again, let me know. And, I kind of blinked a few times and said, John, I think we're going to raise. And I did talk to a few other people. It wasn't just John, because I think it's important to always have a process. But in retrospect, they weren't serious contenders. I probably should have had more people in that process. But I really just wanted to work with John, and it worked out. And so I got lucky in some ways. But also the luck was the fact that we had this great relationship. So yeah, I guess like the lessons I extract there are, try to build relationships, try to get warm interest people from folks they trust, and also always do a process and always do it in parallel, and try to do it in a tight timeline. Don't just let it go forever, because otherwise people might take 6 months to make a call and congrats, your company, maybe had a nice round, but or had a nice round coming, but maybe it's dead by then. So, and also you've had a massive distraction. That's another thing, is when you fundraise, just like isolate the team from it. It's your job. It's not the team's job. Don't distract the team while you do it.
Great. Harry, do you want to go next?
Sure. I have one semi-joking, semi-serious question, and one actual, deeper question. The first one is basically like, as a community-led company, I'm wondering if you've ever thought about doing a Reg CF or something like that, let a bunch of designers and so on invest in Figma, because it's. I say this selfishly because I'd love to have some exposure, but also because I think it goes to the mission and the community-driven spirit of it. So that's one. The other is, what you were talking about around like raising the seed and Series A and so on while still building the product reminded me a lot of Airtable's journey, which went through the same thing. It was like 5 years just heads down building product. Kudos, because that's an insane amount of conviction, right? It's just like, okay, this is the right thing to build, and like requires a lot of time to like just keep going on that front, or a lot of courage to keep going on that front. But I guess to talk about a very specific inflection point, when did you know, like, you alluded to the fact that you can't just like give people stuff and then have them keep coming back. You have to like wow them at the first impression, right? Like, when did you know that like it was ready, right? And like you alluded to this a little bit, but like, I guess my question is, was there a killer feature, right? Was there like a killer use case, a tipping point at which you're like, that's it, like that'll keep people coming back?
Yeah. I don't know if there's like a killer point necessarily. We actually launched without multiplayer, which is kind of hilarious now in retrospect. We knew we wanted to build it at some point, but we just hadn't have it built yet, and we felt like it was the time to launch. We felt like we'd get much more feedback if we launched. I mean, part of it was the numbers. Like, we were actually able to see when people, came. I mean, just like if people came on board, we knew that, the difference between someone using it for an hour and then never coming back, and someone like still using it a week later. And so we want to see that there was some retention, even if it was low. And so that was kind of what we're looking for in the start. But honestly, also it was a bit team driven. Like, we had been at it for a long time, and it was just time. Like, the team needed it. We needed to launch. And I think that's the other thing, is if for some reason you ignore the advice I gave earlier and you decide to take this really long journey to launch, which I suggest you don't, launch sooner if you can, be aware that your team might be very demoralized by that. And that was something that definitely was the case for Figma for a while. And so I'm glad we figured out how to get it out there. On the question of fundraising and raising from designers, I think that's an awesome idea. There's some complexity there in terms of just like accredited investor status. And that's why we haven't
that's why I mentioned Reg CF as the crowdfunding statutes and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't looked into Reg CF yet. I think there's also a dynamic of, when you raise, usually the valuation is something that you're kind of keeping quiet for a bit before you like announce it publicly. And so it'd be really fun to find a way to get more designers involved, but also I think like just the best way to do it is to get to the point where you can trade publicly. which is not something we're rushing to do. Like we want to do it at the right time, but that's probably the best way to like, make it so that we have more of our community along for the ride.
Great. Dylan, this one actually came in from Mitra earlier, and maybe this is related to your question about, or my question about what's next post Figma, but apparently you bought a green-haired clown CryptoPunk from her brother, small world. Could you see yourself starting a crypto company one day?
I bought it for your brother?
Mitra, maybe you can provide some context here.
Reach out to me, Dylan@figma.com. I love that guy. I'm fast in my crypto. My partner, my wife, is actually running a crypto company, and so I get to have the sort of tag along experience of watching a crypto founder every day. And holy shit, it is way harder than SaaS. I have zero interest in starting a crypto company. It's so hard. Not only so I remember one of the first few weeks of like incorporation or something, I asked some stupid question to my lawyer, who's actually now a great VC. His name is Ted Wang, and he's a cowboy. And my lawyer said, Ted goes, "Look, Dylan, your job is to innovate on the tech and make this thing work. My job is to tell you not to innovate on the legal strategy." And he was right. You don't want to innovate on legal strategy if you don't have to. In crypto, you don't have to just like, it's not just about innovating on the legal strategy. It's about, you have to also figure out, what's my economic model, and you have to figure out, how do I make groundbreaking tech? How do I create an entire like different incentive model that works? How do I market it? Because it's all about brand. I mean, it's a really, really hard challenge across like 5 or 6 different dimensions. And many of those are things that you don't even have to deal with in SaaS world. So yeah, no interest, but a big fan of everyone that does, and I'm also really a big believer in crypto as a whole. Awesome. And a huge fan of CryptoPunks. Check out CryptoPunks if you haven't already. They're kind of like, now I bought them when they're like super cheap, and so I'm not saying you should buy one today because they're like now insanely expensive, but I think speaking of like launching something at the right time and really being visionary, they basically this entire NFT space. They basically figured out this way to create a collectible market and this is when no one had ever thought about it before, way before CryptoKitties, and the code is so elegant. I mean, it's just this beautiful, beautiful project that creates beautiful clowns as well as many other things.
Awesome. We have, I think we have 2 more questions, 5 minutes left. Hopefully we can get through both. Ina, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Definitely a serious Figma user here. Now, definitely a fan of everything you say, of doing things your way. I really respect that. With that comes the question that, all right, let me see if I can explain it correctly. So I believe that at any moment, we'll live in some sort of multiverse of options and choices. So I sort of, if you look back now of the time between 2012, 2017. Mm-hmm. So what were these, parallel opportunities did you kind of sense in there? What are the compromises you made that later you went back to, or maybe some of them circled back to you and you had to realize them? So to me, the whole making of process, this prenatal stage of the startup is very interesting, very crucial, because I think that all things are there always for you. They just happen at different time, right? So I kind of want to sense that, compromise / choice in a bigger scale, not just features and functionalities.
So is the question sort of like, what are the forking paths that are like the alternate universes of Figma, or?
What do you think were the alternate universe for Figma, and what pieces of them are probably coming back to you right now?
Well, there's definitely a lot of alternate universes where Figma no longer exists. So, due to the team falling apart, due to, our strategy being wrong, like I mentioned before, that was definitely an inflection point. Due to, one example actually with our launch, our closed beta launch was, we had a launch where a launch plan that was super small in scope. Like we thought, we'll try to find these like trade magazines and like we'll just tell a few people. And I think Danny, who was on our board, said, no, you have to do it as big as possible, be as loud as you can. And it's been funny actually how much of the original launch of Figma I've been coming back to recently as we think about like new product areas and new things we can do. Because it turns out that like some of the stuff around like how do you develop consistent messaging that flows across all the different outputs you have. You know, how do you have like a strategy to get feedback from customers early? You know, how do you make sure that you have like a really meaningful announcement? These are all things that these are lessons that you learn once, but you have to learn them like you have to learn them repeatedly as more people come on the team. And so that's an example of something that was a branching path that has kind of come back to us in some ways, which is kind of fascinating. And it's also been interesting to think through how do you canonize that more? Like, you know, it seems like in a perfect world, okay, you launch a new product or something like that, you just have a checklist. And the reality is it's never quite that simple, but there are, I think, some things that are just kind of requirements, right? You want to have that clear messaging, you want to have the differentiator, you want to have like something that's about the vision of where you're going. You want to have hopefully some people that will amplify the launch. You want to have, in a perfect world, some cultural tension that you're tapping into. You know, and for us, I think we did it almost by accident, right? Like we didn't want to create cultural tension, but design being collaborative, that was a thing that people were pretty wary about. Like half the comments in our original launch was, well, I don't know if I want to do that. Like one person said, they said, what was it? It was, you know, camel is a horse on by committee. Another person said, if this is the future of design, I'm changing careers. Like people were really anti-Figma when we first did it. And so I think if you get love and hate, that's good. Neutrality is bad. But yeah, I think train people up to recognize those lessons and to be prepared for that. That's an interesting one too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Good to meet you.
Awesome. And one last one we'll try and sneak in here. If you were to start Figma back at day one, Dylan, what is the biggest thing that you would do differently?
Hiring. I would hire faster, and I would try to think much more deliberately about forming the team culture and what that meant.
Awesome.
I would also like know how to manage people, which would be really nice because I didn't know how to manage people when I started Figma. It's a skill, it turns out.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. This has been incredible and motivational and inspiring, like I said. And I think, yeah, we all are excited to continue to watch your success and be avid users of Figma. So,
well, thank you, and vice versa. I'm really excited for all of you, and please keep me up to date. I'm just Dylan, DYLAN at figma.com if you want to let me know what you're working on or you know, just everyone to continue the conversation. So, yeah, best wishes to all of you, and thanks again for having me today.
Have a good one.
Thank you, Dylan.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Thank you, Rachel.